Friends, new friends, old friends. I'm Zoe Curnoe, and I am the studio director at Timbre Games in Vancouver, Canada. So we came a little far away for this. So we changed up our format a little bit. So Joe is actually going to interview me for you. So you're getting a little extra entertainment because he's actually pretty funny. He has a script. He's probably not going to stick to it. So,
yeah, we were told this is an audition for Good Morning Britain.
Yeah. Which you will pass and I will fail. Yeah.
No.
So the title of the talk is Breaking Down Team Silos for Inclusion and Productivity. And Jenny actually reached out to me when she was doing SDC and said, can you talk in the learning and development stream about this area? And I was recently interviewed by Patrick Palm, who's the CEO of Fabro, about the same area. And we'll talk about Fabro a little bit too, because it ties into this. With that, start us off, Joe.
All right. So, Zoe.
Yes.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about your background? How did you get into games? Maybe tell the folks here a little bit about Timbre.
Yeah, I will. So I'll go way back. So I have a fine arts degree, I'm sure. So actually tell me, how many of you did not go to school for game development? Me too, and Joe. So I went to school for fine arts. I thought I was going to be an art curator or a photographer. I was a photographer for a little while. And then a friend of mine said, you're really social and you really like people. It's a bit of a solo job. You should try and be a games producer. And I didn't even know that was a thing. Played tons of games. And in the early 2000s, I got my first job making games with artists who didn't have to actually make a living from the games they made, but I had to produce their games. That was a great way to start because they didn't really have any commercial goal, but they wanted to create things that people wanted to engage with. So that was a pretty neat experience. And then I finally, eventually ended up at EA at a certain point, met Joe there actually. And then I've worked at Riot Games. I worked at Backman Entertainment way back in the day, if any of you know that studio. And I was at the Coalition for 8 years before I came to Timbre. So I was the lead producer on Gears 4 and 5 for the campaign. So if you ever want to talk about Gears, I got a lot of stories. And Joe, how did you come to games?
I did not
and
go
how
to
did
school
Timbre
for
come
games
about?
because I don't think games were around when I was going to school. So
Me neither.
I've been doing it about 23 years. Started a company called Radical Entertainment a long time ago. Worked on Simpsons and a few other titles. Went and started my real career at EA. I was on FIFA and made shapes and forms for about 8 years. Didn't know anything about football when I got there. Faked it, and I'm a long-suffering Newcastle United fan. And anyway, spent a long time in international sports. Left EA, went to Microsoft for a couple of years, made Kinect Sports. Left to go over to Capcom. I ran Capcom in Vancouver as the general manager for about 4 years. And then EA called, and I went back to EA and was the vice president of Maxis. And then when COVID hit, I decided I want to move back to Canada from California, and called up Zoe and Jeff, and I said, I think I want to do a thing. Do you want to do a thing? And they went, let's do the thing. And so we're doing the thing.
It was a little more of a hell yeah, but...
It was a hell yeah. So called up Zoe.
Okay, let's make Timbre.
Jeff and I had always planned on doing something. And if you're wondering who Jeff is the creative director of the studio who draws all of us. And as you will see, as Jeff hits pretty much most people that have been asking in Sumo. Last person is Adam Doctor. He draws all of us, and so we've got this whole kind of shtick of what we look like, etc. But anyway, called up Zoe, said let's do a thing. And here we are. I'm happy to be part of the Sumo family.
We just had our 1 year anniversary on June 1st, so it's been kind of fun. Yeah. Hey, woo! So I'm actually going to go to the next slide. This is actually, oh, I went too far.
Nope.
There we go. So this is actually one of the first comics that Jeff drew as we were kind of talking about what our values were and our values of game development. And, you know, we just talked about, gosh, I just hate it when someone goes off and creates something and then delivers it and everyone goes, it's just not what I wanted. In any group, you know, it can be games development, it can be operations, it can be finance, HR. This kind of became one of our core values as we started to hire people and we started to look at how we want to make games. And so it's kind of where this talk has come from. So that's what we're going to be talking about.
So, thus, it's all about breaking down team silos for productivity and inclusion. Yeah. This is what the talk is all about. So how did we get here? How do we find ourselves talking about this here, Patsy?
Yeah, so I mean, just like what I was saying, so we created this as our core tenet of what we wanted to really instill in the team when they started. And something that I'm really interested in is not just on game development teams, but with those other groups. And as I look around the room, I see like Jenny from Learning and Development, Andy's here from Finance, and from EDI, and I want all of those groups to be talking to each other. And so that's what we're trying to do inside Timbre as well, is not just have that cross-discipline thing happening on the game teams, because maybe that's a little obvious to people, but it's with all of those groups, because we can't make games without those support groups. And if we start going off in different directions without those groups being involved in what we're doing, we often end up making assumptions and making a lot of mistakes. So that's kind of what we're here to talk about today.
So let's talk about the word silos.
Yeah.
In Canada, they're full of wheat and they're in the prairies. So
That's
a lot of people
true,
might not know
actually.
what silos are. So
Do you know what
silos
a
a
wheat
thing here?
silo is? You do,
Okay, good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Canada has this huge expanse of land in the middle called the prairies. It's very flat. They say you can watch your dog run away for 3 days. It's a joke. But it's full of wheat fields and wheat silos.
So how does that apply to team development? Tell me about that.
So, well, there's an actual silo here. These two people are silos. But of course, on a game team, we can talk about with discipline silos, right? Art, engineering, design is very obvious. And it's really easy, and we often, I'm going to say, we sometimes blame producers for this, and I think sometimes producers can be, and I'm pointing at myself, the problem, because it's very easy to produce one discipline, right? It's really easy to say, I'm just going to look at this one group, I'm just going to look at what they're doing, and I'm just going to deliver the things that one group's delivering. If you do that, things go a lot quicker, you think, in your head, and you can deliver things very, very quickly, and it's kind of like a factory. But then when everything comes together into that game that you're making, or that initiative that you're developing, or that new thing you're rolling out, other people start getting involved. And what starts to happen is people go, it's not quite what I wanted. I'd like this little thing here, and I'd like this little thing to change. And you kind of have to go all the way back. And it's that old joke about what happens when you assume things. I think everyone knows that joke, but anyways, I'm not going to swear because it's being streamed and recorded. But it can create a lot of those problems. And so when we talk about those silos, it's development silos, it's disciplines. And then it's even, when we were over at Sumo, we've never been to Sumo, the head office before, and Paul was explaining that there's 7 different buildings. And I imagine that there are physical silos get created with that as well. And even across teams, those bigger studios where you've got multiple games, you've got silos between the games. And how often have you experienced, well, that team is working on that technology and so is this team inside the same studio, and they're not talking to each other. And that's certainly something we saw at EA. And when I was at Riot, it was rampant. There was people working on the same initiative in different business groups at the company because those things weren't being combined.
Right. So you're saying that, when we see these things forming, we got to kind of jump in there. Tell me about that.
Yeah, and try and get those people talking to each other. So some things we've been doing at Timbre on the development side is, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of feature teams, right? That's pretty standard knowledge in development, but we talk about player experience teams. And so if we're going to try and deliver the best player experience we can, form a team around that player experience rather than just the feature and the deliverables inside that. And so we're really looking at what's the player experience we're trying to deliver, what are all the disciplines we need to deliver that entire player experience in that group, and that includes QA, who often get left out of that, right? How many of you at your studio's QA is just its own group, separate from your development teams? None of you? Really? That's awesome, that's amazing. But that's really traditional development, right? You'll have one embedded QA person, and then there's an entire external QA team, and you get that with publisher relationships, right? So we're doing a lot of things like that, where it's really focused on that player experience. You've got all those disciplines involved inside there, and then you're pushing forward on that.
So do you have any more examples of how we do that at Timbre? Like, how do we remove some of those kind of barriers and on the silo-wise things?
Yeah, I'm and more also in the non-development people. So we do a lot of social activities and a lot of playing the game together. So one of our core tenets was that we are fun and that we have fun as a group, but that we also play the games that we make. And so it's often, I'm assuming some of you experience this, maybe you're all gonna say no, but I'm gonna think that you're lying, but that's okay. Sometimes it's hard to get certain disciplines to play the game you're making. They just necessarily don't really wanna play it. And that's okay, but then it makes it really hard to explain to those people what the experience is you're trying to deliver. And so, but we do this across all disciplines. So operations, HR, finance, they play our game with us, and we do our sprint reviews with all of those groups in the sprint reviews, so they understand what we're delivering, and they actually understand when we then go to them and ask for things, they know why we're asking for those things. And so they don't just come to our social activities, they play the game with us, we put them in co-op play tests, they come to our sprint reviews, and yes, those things can get a little bit big and bloated, but if you set rules and say, hey, maybe just don't give feedback in the review, come and be an observer and talk to us afterwards. But everyone becomes so much more invested in the experience, and then we're not misunderstanding each other when we're asking for things.
Totally. I mean, Richard is with us today. Richard is I call him finance guy respectfully, but he's a finance analyst. I think he may have been involved in the speed run that we did.
He did, actually, yeah, it's a great thing. So at the end of our milestones, we've been having a speed run contest. We're just making a 15-minute prototype. We paired people up, and Richard paired up, I think, with our lead programmer, and he hadn't actually played the prototype yet. And he did a speed run, and we were trying to see, we gave prizes to whoever could do it the quickest, but it was quite a fun experience.
Yeah. Nothing's worse than having the finance department be better than the game developer and doing it. You never live that down.
Yeah.
So I've heard you mention in the past the cultural weight of tools.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Excuse me. I'm going to take a drink. Hang on one second. It's going to be a little controversial, but I hate Jira. And I think that Jira actually creates silos with people. And I saw this happen at the coalition. We were using, a lot of people don't like Handsoft either. It worked for us quite well. And in Handsoft, developers could actually manage their own workload. They could see how much work they were taking on. They could see when they had too much. They could break down their work themselves inside sprints, and they didn't need a producer or actually even a lead to be doing that work for them. And we switched to Jira, and when we switched to Jira, it became much more of a producer thing to manage Jira. And it was a lot of management of the software rather than it coming from the developers themselves and feeding into it what they wanted. So much more kind of empowered personal accountability structure rather than top down. And what happened inside Jira is because of the production structure on some of the teams, because they were so discipline focused, they were just managing that group of people. They were having a really hard time finding those cross-discipline ways of combining the work inside Jira. And it was creating this very, I think, strict structure where you couldn't, it was very, very difficult to identify those things inside the Jira structure. Excuse me. Teams that weren't cross-discipline didn't have a hard time with it at all. My team was completely cross-discipline, and we had, it was like we were fighting against the tools all the time. So when we started Timbre, our lead producer, Alexi, and I started looking at alternatives, and we looked at a few different ones, and the one we came to was Favreau. And Favreau is the original developers of Handsoft. They created Handsoft, were quite successful. They sold it to Perforce. So Perforce now owns Handsoft. Interestingly, a lot of companies now are moving away from Handsoft and are looking at other solutions. And in Favreau, it's very much set up for you create one big card, and inside there you identify all of the work of all the different groups. It's very visual, it's very drag and drop, it's very easy to use. And when you're in there, everyone can see each other's work, and it's completely out in the open to the whole team, the features, the player experiences, and all of the different groups that are feeding into that, rather than kind of producers and leads collecting the information and parceling it out to people. And it's just been an incredible experience for us. Now, Favreau is quite new, so I will warn you about that if you start looking at it. They're continually developing features, but they're an amazing partner, and we meet with them every month. We give them feedback, and we've been getting tons of, we met with them about QA, and they've so far implemented 6 of the features that we asked for. Excuse me.
Yeah, really, tailing off what Zoe said, Favreau was something new, and if you can get me to use something like that, because, you know, using any kind of thing to keep me in line is generally a challenge. But Favreau has been great. And so it's all about, I think, that addressing the need of someone that they want to be organized, they want to see what's going on, but if you get it with a wall of text, it could just be brutal. And if you have a really great UI and great user experience, people tend to adopt it a bit faster than most. So I think it was a great call to use that. So.
It's very, actually, it's a great point I didn't mention is we actually have our executive team using it. And so we have our own board, all of our work is in there, we can collaborate inside it. And it was actually feedback from Joe, and he came to us one day in the executive team, there's 4 of us, and he said, I don't have a clear enough picture of what you're all tackling. And so we were siloing. off into our groups. And we weren't, even though we were meeting every week, we were talking every single day, it wasn't really visible necessarily to each of us what we were all tackling. And so at that lead level or director level or executive level, you still need that visibility. And so now we've been able to use Favreau for that. And just there are some tools out there that really just aren't conducive to that way of working a whole bunch of different disciplines and different groups across a company in one place. And that's what we've been trying to use it for.
Yeah, making it streamlined for people, right? One source of truth. Always go here, and if it's not here, it'll tell you where to go to get to the other stuff, but it's just finding all that stuff. So agile is a super awesome buzzword that people love to use. Agile.
And hate. People hate as well, yes.
Yes, also. So a lot of people think it's like, oh, it's the cure-all. It does everything for you. But what do you see as some of the challenges that we run into as we start moving to an agile process?
Yeah, you know, it's been such a, actually that's a question for all of you. How many of you are working in an agile framework, either Kanban or Scrum? And how many of you feel it's working? Like, yeah, I see a lot of the hands. So I mean, like fully, like you're not just doing stand-ups and sprints. You're actually doing group sprint planning, story points, like the whole kit and caboodle. and probably because it didn't work, right? The way you implemented it, it was a bit of a struggle and it was difficult. So when I was at Riot Games, I met someone named Barry Hawkins. He's my mentor to this day, and he was an expert in agile development. And he showed me how it can actually work. And it wasn't about sort of all those what we call ceremonies, the documents you produce, but it was about the mindset. And it was about that mindset that you cannot deliver a game or software or art without all those other people involved. And it was that idea that it's all about iteration, it's all about feedback, it's all about the player experience. And if you focus on the agile mindset rather than the process and the tools and the ceremonies, you're going to change everyone's mindset first and then implement the methods. Because if you implement the methods first without the agile mindset, it just doesn't succeed. And I think, you know, seeing what you're all saying is like, we're doing agile. No, actually, we're not doing it. Is because it didn't really work, because you have to look at that agile mindset of that constant iteration, knowing things are going to change, not planning a project completely from the very beginning and knowing you're going to write a document and you're going to deliver exactly what you said you're going to deliver, because it's going to change. And if any of you ever worked on a video game where you designed the game on day one and it's the same thing you shipped 3 years later? No. So we don't have those processes that encourage that. It's going to be really challenging. And that doesn't just apply to games development. For every other group, it's that same thing. If we don't get together, iterate, try it, fail, which we talk about a lot, it's okay to have those failures, learn from it, and keep moving. It's a big part of that.
So you've been kind of talking a bit about cross-discipline teams, making sure those are bridges to connect everything. You know, how does working this way help us towards a more inclusive cultures at Timbre?
Yeah, so so this is something else. I wish we could just have a conversation, because I'm asking you questions and you're like, yes. But have you all heard of something called in-groups and out-groups? Have you ever heard of that? So there's something that you naturally create as a human when you're like, I'm an engineer and you're an artist, and I know what I'm talking about, and you do not understand my world, right? Well, it also applies in discrimination. So you're like, I'm white and you're black and we're different. And that can happen in those situations as well. So if we're doing that at work with disciplines, we're actually creating those in and out groups. And we're actually causing people to go, you're not like me, go away, I'm not gonna listen to you. I'm gonna do things the way I wanna do them because I know better than you do, or I'm worth more than you are. And if we're doing that inside our development teams and at work, we're actually creating situations where people are better than others. And it becomes quite an unhealthy situation.
Yeah. So now, dovetailing into that, a lot of times when you are advertising a job and they say, oh, why don't you go see if they're a culture fit for the studio?
Yes.
We don't like that term because it's like we are asking you to fit what we are. But Zoe came up with the term culture ad.
I didn't come up with it. I just implemented it at the studio.
Just take the credit. I wasn't going to call you on it. How does that come into play with us?
Yeah, we had a lot of conversations about it. Because actually, one of our recruiters, who's an amazing partner, and he said to me, "Who's doing your culture fit interview?" And I nearly like fell back out of my chair because I was like, no, we're not doing that. And so we were talking a lot about, yes, we have a core set of values at our studio, but the culture is going to be slightly different depending on the team, depending on the game you're working on, and that's going to happen. The team's going to create that. So if we're only looking at people that fit into this very strict box of culture, we're not going to actually have a diverse team. And so we had to look at what is this person adding in terms of their ideas and their opinions and their views, but they do have to have a values match. So they do have to be okay with trying and iterating and failing. They have to be okay with collaboration. They have to honestly want to have fun at work and play the game. So there's a few values that we really stuck with our core values, and that's what we interview around, rather than is this someone I want to hang out with? Because you're not hiring your friends, you're hiring people that are competent at what they do and that fit into that, is that core value structure that you've created.
Right. And it's so important too in this industry, right? You know, I mean, wait for it. I'm an old white guy with a beard. I can go into that room.
What?
I can disappear in 5 seconds and no one know who I am just because it's like I look like a developer. It's super important to think about these things. Certainly, you know, when we are who we are. So we've been working hard to break down some of these silos, and we've worked really hard to make sure that we're an inclusive culture. You know, culture add all that stuff. How does this impact, you know, productivity?
Yeah, because I was thinking about this a lot as I was putting these ideas together, and it's all about happy people and empowered people and people with high accountability and high empowerment make amazing stuff. And so if people are feeling a sense of psychological safety at work, they feel like they can fail and it's okay, they feel like you hired them because you thought they were an amazing, talented person, and they have this amazing inclusive environment where they get to work with people from all the different disciplines, they're going to make better stuff. They're going to make games that are more fun. The whole experience is just going to be better for everybody. And so as a result, their velocity goes up. I'm sure most of you experience this. You've been like, what is going on? Like, we're just not delivering things. That milestone wasn't very good. What happened? And sometimes you'll look at things and be like, it's the process, it's the build, our tools aren't great. It's usually the people when you come down to it. And it's something that Rod Ferguson, who is the head of the coalition, said to me once. He said, you know what I've realized after all these years of making games is it's just about the people. And I think when we boil down a lot of our problems, that's where we end up. And we end up identifying what those problems are.
Yeah, totally. Pretty common assumption I think a lot of people have is that you move faster when you work by yourself, just work alone. We're talking a bit about that.
Well, it's true, you do, right? If I want to just create something in this new policy, if I just write it myself and I don't share it with the executive team and I don't talk to you about it, and I suddenly go, hey everyone, here's this new policy. I've done it really quickly, but then I'm going to show it to someone and they're going to go, well, that doesn't actually fit with what I wanted. I'd like this feedback integrated, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to work on that feedback by myself, then I'm going to present it again, and they're going to go, no, that's not quite what I wanted, and then I'm going to go back again, and it's going to end up taking way longer in the end, but it feels to me like it's a much faster, less resistant way of working. And as soon as I start integrating those other people in the process, it feels a little painful at first, but in the end, you're going to actually produce things faster and to a higher quality because you've taken all those other opinions into account during your process.
Yeah. Even as recent as today.
Yeah.
Right? We sat down with Stephen Webb because we have a really gnarly 5,000-page contract thing we're looking at. And I'll go through it and I'll go, you see what I see. And then Zoe will do the same thing. And then we sit down with Stephen and we go, let's do this together because we've caught things, he's caught things that we've completely missed, and we work together. But in that
conversation, it was finance.
Yes.
And our finance partner,
yes,
it was Sumo Finance, it was legal and business development and us. And having that conversation all together is so much more valuable.
And you all understand exactly what's being said in that conversation too, right? It's not just about the legal, it's all the different ramifications. We got through that way faster than I thought, right?
Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
So we've been talking about, things like creative pursuits, making games, pushing the innovations. How does all this kind of foster into this?
Yeah, well, I think it's if you think about the three things, which is the breaking down the silos, the productivity and the inclusion of like ingredients. Like you've got a recipe and these are my ingredients for game development, or ingredients for just making healthy, happy teams. the ultimate goal is to innovate, is certainly right now with UE5, right, as we're all talking about this, and is to make amazing player experiences. So if we have all those things as those ingredients, you've got an empowered team that has high accountability and they're really happy, and you've got processes that aren't artificially creating silos sort of unintentionally that you don't want to be there, you're going to push innovation much, much farther because you're going to feel that safety and that willingness to push things to not the way you've always done them in the past. And you're going to raise that innovation bar much higher. You're going to be able to push past things you've maybe done before because you've got, there's habits we create, right? Which are like, well, I've always done it like this, so I'm going to continue doing it like this. But if you want to be a little bit brave and go, I'm going to try some different things so I can see some things aren't quite pushing as far, we're not getting the quality that we want, you're going to just push that innovation bar much higher.
Yeah, for sure. As Zoe said as well, with Rob Ferguson from the Coalition Signature, it's about the people. It is 100% about the people. And one of the things I think that Zoe has done for us at Timbre, she asks a question in interviews, which very few people answer right. It's about inclusion. Talk about working in an inclusive environment.
So I also would say that there aren't wrong answers. There are just some strange answers we get. But I do. So I ask everybody that we interview. I'm only interviewing leads and above now, but I was interviewing everybody. And I ask everyone, if they're a lead, I say, what have you done in the past to create an inclusive culture on your team? And then if they're not a lead, I also say to them, what does an inclusive culture mean to you? And what are some things you've done on the teams you've been on to create that culture? And it's actually shocking to me how many people in privileged groups have not even spent a moment thinking about it. And especially last year when all the Blizzard information came out and it was in your face every single day, how could you possibly not be thinking about it? And I'll tell you two of the answers I get. One of them is, my partner is A, B, C, D, E, F diverse, so I can't possibly be racist, discriminatory, any of those things. Quite shocking. The other one I get is, will you prevent that behavior by teaching children to not behave like that? It's like, what? So we have to wait for a whole other generation to fix this? I don't think I'm willing to wait. So, and I've definitely had some really interesting conversations, but it is, it's more our ask is for, I guess the part of the culture is, I just want you to have thought about it. You don't have to know how to solve it. We just want you to have thought about it and to be thinking about it and then bring those thoughts to Timbre when you come to our studio.
Yeah. And it's asking, I think, some probing questions. I mean, we don't get into names, but there was an individual that Zoe was talking to that was on our team. And Zoe asked this person, what are your career aspirations? Like, what do you really want to do with us? Where do you want to go? And the person got really emotional because this is a person that has been working in the industry for over 25 years and has never been asked once by his manager. Like, not where do you see yourself in 5 years? Not that. It's like, you're here now, and this is what you're doing. Where would you like to go? How can we help? What do you want to do? And they teared up because no one had ever asked him for that.
No.
And that's important to have those open conversations because it adds to the plan.
And then when you create your goals, Joe will look at them and go, those aren't big enough. Dream bigger. So.
Yeah, we share all of our goals with every single person at Timbre. Every single person at Timbre can see all of my goals, including the personal goals that I have. Like, it's not about me. You don't have to talk all the time. You don't always have to be funny, all that shit that I put in there, right? And I send it out because I need policing on that. And we shared all those goals, and it was amazing. Some people were super nervous. It's like, oh my God, if I show you my goals, I'm like, it's like they didn't want to do that. Yeah. And it has been incredible. And the goals are better, and I have been finding they're achieving them faster now. Yeah, because there's a strength in saying, I'm going to go there, are you going to help me? And everyone's going to help me if you share those goals openly. And we use that.
And I would say too, the team drove that. So we did a goals exercise because we're new, we're not actually on the Sumo goal setting system. So I just set up a Miro board and said, here's your template, put your goals in here so they're easily shareable. But that wasn't my intention, knowing people are quite private about those things. And then someone on the team said, hey, I'm gonna share mine, are you okay? Do you wanna share yours? And I said, well, I'll set up a Slack channel for you, share yours, but we won't make it mandatory. And then the entire team, 25 people, shared their goals in the Slack channel, and they all started giving each other feedback on goals and offering to help each other achieve the goals that were in there. But they created that. I'm not taking credit for that.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was really good, and it really strengthens our culture because we win together and we lose together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's 12 o'clock.
It's 12 o'clock.
We should leave time for questions.
Yes. Where did we put the plants with the preceded questions in the audience?
Can we get this on? We live? Okay.
Also, don't be afraid to ask a question. There literally are no dumb questions, honestly.
Hi, great talk, thank you. You said about agile failing because it was the wrong mindset to start with. How would you go about changing the mindset, and how would you go about supporting the team to keep that mindset when they're under milestone pressures and they just revert to what they know they can do?
Absolutely, that's a fantastic question. And so what we're doing is we're bringing in agile experts and trainers. Myself and our lead designer could do that, but we just don't have the time. And so we just recognize that we want to bring in an expert to do that initial transition, and then to help us and give us the tools that we need to move forward and to help with that mindset shift. Because it's just like with anything, you need experts, right? And you need experts in those domains to help you through that. And it's so funny you say that. Everyone always says, but you can't use Agile framework with set milestones. You absolutely can. I'm happy to talk about that more with people. If you want to email me, I'm zoe@timbregames.com. It's super easy to remember. But you can do it. And it's not actually that difficult, to be honest. But it is the mindset shift. Yeah.
So you talked about having a player experience team. How do you make sure to keep your vision for the game as a whole like stable and in focus, while also making sure the player experience can contribute a better player experience for the game at the end of the day without completely shifting the vision and putting people off track?
So something that we do, so we have multiple player experience teams. So they're delivering. So one of them is like the CCC teams, like controls, camera, and the goal of that team is to deliver that player experience. But then we also have certain, I'll call them ceremonies. That makes it sound really strange, but where those groups get together and they review their work as a group together. So they're constantly kind of going apart a little bit, working on something and coming back together. And they also do a lot of cross-player experience brainstorming. So they actually have access to, and really it also is access to information. So they all can see everyone's work. They can see all of their brainstorming boards. They can see everything in one place. So it makes it a little bit easier to do that. Inside Agile, there's a process called Scrum of Scrums. It's a fantastic thing to implement because you pick key people from each of those player experience teams and they come together once a week to talk about what they've each been working on. And if anything inside their groups is blocking another group. And that happens regularly. And you don't want to do it any less than probably once a week. At least that's what we're doing. But I say every team is different and has different processes. And so you were talking about vision as well. So that is the key, is just having that really clear vision that they know that that's what they have to stick to, really. Like that's not really movable in that case, and they're delivering towards it. And having a game director that has that vision and those goals, of course, is essential to that too.
My question, I think, was pretty much answered there. I was going to ask about just rule of thumb with people being autonomous and giving the people that freedom to fail type thing, but also this high bandwidth communication and everyone going together. How do you just kind of let things get out within a certain range before you sort of keep people kind of pulling back in?
Like you're talking about high team empowerment and accountability in that space?
Allowing people to have that space, but also that you're trying to get everyone moving as one unit.
It actually comes back to your question, which is you have to have super clear goals and a super clear vision for what you're delivering. To keep, everyone has to have those same things inside each of their player experience groups. And then the stakeholder or the whatever you want to call them inside that group, product owner, whoever that person is continually communicating with your game director to make sure those things are clear, or your tech director if it's pure technology that you're developing. Does that answer the question?
Yeah,
sort of.
It's a little easier too because we're not super huge as well, right? We're kind of in more constant contact. It becomes more challenging to manage as you get huge, right?
It's where the Scrum of Scrums is essential. I'll tell you.
My question was about remote work. now everyone moved in remote and it creates more silos. The tools that should be helping us solve this problem, like Teams or Slack, they not really there. And how you handle with this? Any
So it's a good
advice?
question. We started remote, so we're lucky, right? So we had to start there. I can talk about tools. So I would say Favro has helped immensely with that. Miro we use extensively. We're on Slack constantly. I know a lot of you don't use Slack, but we started. We use it. And that is where a lot of the communication is happening. We also record almost all of our meetings. And so if you don't attend one, and I'll do that quite often because I can't go to everything, and I'll just watch the recording while I'm doing something else. So that being willing to do the asynchronous stuff, especially in different time zones, it makes you a little uncomfortable, but it does help immensely. Those things will sound really simple, but that's what we're doing. But I will say we're lucky because we started remote. And so we just had to get used to it quite quickly.
It's quite strange. We found that when we get together, it feels like we haven't gotten together for the first time. Like we've had people come out all together, and we've, a lot of people we haven't. I met like about 8 people I've never met in person a few weeks back. We had everyone as we were squatting over at Adam Hawk's office, and it just felt like another day because we're so fervent in our communication.
I know that some companies, they trying to create different policies to handle this, like always enable video camera policy on the calls, or trying to run some self-presentation to get people more involved into this. Have you tried, like, what you think about such practices?
Forcing people to have their cameras on is not a particularly inclusive behavior because some people are very uncomfortable with it. So I think you have to allow that with people, which makes other people uncomfortable. But we need to accommodate people and their personal preferences. I also would argue, we're just not used to talking on the phone, but we used to only talk on the phone, before technology, and we were fine with it. So I think getting more comfortable with that, helps us as well. But we don't have strict policies of strict, connection. Yeah, we don't have actually anything like that. Yeah. And really our communication is if you can't make a meeting, make sure that you know whether you need to be there or not, but we do it in this very high personal accountability culture. Whereas you are delivering what you're delivering, your hours are yours to figure out how you deliver the work you need to deliver. And if you don't deliver it, you need to communicate that to your team so that they know what's happening. And I think with that, encouraging that high communication constantly, the team is constantly talking to each other. And not that we haven't had some struggles, we've had some new people join the team. We have a Slack channel, which is, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called Review Ready for the game we're making. And every time something is ready for people to look at, it's just posted in that channel constantly, even before the formal review of that thing. So everyone can look at it, watch a video, grab it, and constantly keep looking at it. So it's not just these like set reviews or things are being looked at, it's constantly being shared and discussed. We, our Slack channels for our game, every group is in every single Slack channel. So if you're in one player experience team, you can't only be in that one player experience team, you're in every single player experience team. And I know that might make some people go, that's a nightmare on a 200-person team. I promise it helps with that siloing and not being aware of what's happening in other groups. And so you can choose to participate or not in those groups. You can mute them so they're not constantly pinging, but you have access to all that information. And I think even for you, like you pop in that channel all the time and just watch the videos that are being posted, and you know what's happening on the game without having a review.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And it could be something simple, like, if you haven't figured it out, we're kind of in this Slack. It's such a great system for us because people, oh, did you get my email? No, I didn't get your email, even though I did. I just didn't see it, or I forgot it, or I opened it and didn't know I opened it, and it's gone forever. We use a lot of this, a lot of information sharing in Slack because it's super secure, it's super fast, and it's really easy to search for. But that's just like one part of it. We have a whole bunch of Slack channels where people just want to hang out as well. We have a number of people that work for us that are desperately wanting to get back into an office environment because that's just, their soul is dying because they're not interacting with human people. And there's always a huddle going on. It's like, hey, I'm feeling sad. I'm going to turn my huddle on. Everybody kind of dumps in there. And even if you're just working, it's like, how you doing? And you're just kind of talking together. It's so tiny, but it makes such a huge impact on some people too.
That's actually a good point to the question you're asking, that we found Slack huddles are incredibly important. And if you're using Teams, it's just calling someone on Teams.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Certainly in Slack, like it's a button and you hit it and you're immediately talking to the person. We weren't using it last year and it was creating some communication problems. And we realized our team didn't even know it was a feature. Sometimes you don't know the software you're using. And once that happened, it was like you could see the little huddle icons just lighting up like a Christmas tree, and it's being used a lot. Yeah. Yeah. At the bottom, like when you're talking to someone in a conversation, there's a little thing in the bottom, and it's a toggle, a little headphone symbol. It says huddle, and you press it, and you both end up on a call together immediately. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. It's like, it's not, you have to look for it, but it's just like a teeny little button.
Yeah, but just like you said, we didn't know it was in there. And our lead producer interviewed for a position at Slack a long time ago, so she knows all the Slack features, and she was like, why aren't you using Huddle? And we were like, I don't know what Huddle is. And then we all started using it, so yeah. And you can even screen share in Huddle, which is really cool. So we do a lot of that as well.
Richard and I huddle almost every day.
Yeah, I was actually about to say that. I was like, we've looked at a lot of Excel
It usually
sheets
starts
in
off,
Huddle.
good morning, Joe. I'm like, here we go.
Yeah.
Just hit Huddle, he's there.
Yeah.
How are we doing for time?
12:13.
As teams transition from remote to hybrid work, what are some of the things you think you could do in an office or have in an office to make sure the collaboration just continues seamlessly?
I mean, I think the biggest one that we love to do is have a cross-discipline team sitting together. I remember way back on SSX, not the good ones, I worked on an EA, but I got to the team and the level designers were over there and the level artists were over there on completely different ends of the floor, and they weren't talking to each other, and they were actually kind of angry at each other. And I was like, why are you guys angry at each other? And they were just frustrated. It was a super difficult project. And the immediate thing that I did there, and I've kept it ever since, is I moved the level artists and the designers and I paired them up. It was like, you're gonna sit next to each other. And I know to a lot of you your experience, you're like, well, that's obvious. But so many game companies don't do that. And so we will be sitting our player experience groups together so that the group that's delivering that player experience are all in this similar space. And so they're hearing those casual conversations, they're really quickly looking at each other's work, and they have that proximity to be able to deliver something as a discrete group. So it's kind of one of those really important things, yeah.
We had a question up in the front in the blue shirt. He's been super patient. And he's bigger than all of us, so.
I just wanted to ask how long your sprints are and how you deal with the sort of review and getting feedback and then tasking all of that.
Yeah, so you know what, that was a challenge. So we're doing 3-week sprints and 6-week milestones. We were doing 2-week sprints in 4-week milestones, and that did not work. And so we changed, and that has been a challenge. But we moved to the longer sprints because we felt like we could deliver work kind of in those 2 weeks and then use that last week as a bit of an iteration sprint. What we're trying to get to is iterating through the whole sprint to some degree, but we're not quite there yet because we were working on a prototype. So, but we are finding we like the 2-3-week sprint model. It's working quite well. But I would say the 2-week sprint was like, that was a sprint. Like it was too fast. And we'd get to the end and be like, oh gosh, it was a little too rapid for us. So that's what we're gonna keep trying going forward, yeah. Are you finding that same thing, like it's like at the end of it, there's just like, we gotta get through the feedback and we can't get,
Yeah, so we basically started doing 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then having a hardening week. So
Yeah.
we basically have a week off just
Yeah. We did that at the coalition, and all it was used for was to add more work. So, or to finish what wasn't done, right? And it was supposed to be this week of planning and hardening, and as they say in the project management world, you'll just fill the time if you make it longer. So that's just my one word of caution for that one, is if you do that, you tend to not get it, I guess. Yeah.
Hello. I work in the project management office for Sumo Digital, and I'm actually looking at ways to facilitate some of these ideas, not just within a project, but across projects
all the
and also
studios.
across all the studios. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how this could scale, obviously with your previous experience working in bigger teams and bigger organizations.
We should probably talk.
Yeah, I've written that down.
I have a lot of ideas about that. But I will say, so it sounds like I'm trying to sell Favreau. I'm not. I just love it as a software. But it has really great roll-up. So there's a feature in software that is my favorite thing ever, whereas you have a card of a feature or a thing or whatever that is, or a task, and it can go on any board, and it can be shared on any other group's board. So you can, we can have a card on our board in the executive team, and I can push it to the operations team, or I could push it to finance, or I could push it to HR, and they can also have it on their board so they could see what we're doing inside that card. So it's one part of it, and then you can roll, they're called collections, but they're just your boards. Your boards go into collections. You can roll those all up into an executive or studio level review. And creating roadmaps in Favreau is click and drag.
Yeah, like minutes.
It's the fastest roadmap creator I've ever used. It's not a silver bullet, nothing's perfect, but it is the first software I've ever worked with that feels human. It feels like it's about collaboration rather than collections of tasks and collections of tickets. Collections of tickets are great for maybe for filing when you have lists of bugs. But when you're trying to develop a collaborative creative project, just having lists of tickets is what's creating the silos, is what I think. It's my opinion.
Making it easy to visually navigate to at a glance, right? We do, like we put pictures of things on these boards. It sounds silly, but we'll put a picture of something on them. It's like, where's the picture?
Yeah.
There are pictures away. I know it's in that card. And like, it really works. Makes it so easy.
Yeah. But yeah, the roll-up features at that higher level are quite powerful in there, and it connects to Jira. So if you just wanted to use it at that level to share information, you can, and you can hook it with Jira. But email me. I don't know if someone else is in here or not. We could talk all day, so someone else is going to have to tell us to shut up.
Jenny knows.
Hello. You've talked a lot about cross-communication within the team and using tools like Scrum of Scrums to sort of get the wider communication out there, as well as tools that we can use to help with that. But I think from personal experience all across the games industry, that can sometimes not filter down as well, and it sort of stays at that higher level where like, oh yeah, I've got a problem in my Scrum, can you help me out? But when those things take a long time to sort of get resolved, it can sort of slow down the whole process. So I guess I was just going to ask, like, what do you think about, or ways that we can sort of improve that going forward, and how do we sort of, I guess,
That's a great question and observation. It's totally true. And you really what you have to do is bring it back to that essence of Agile, whereas your team, your player experience team, whatever that team is, has all the tools inside the team to deliver the thing they're trying to deliver as much as possible, so that there aren't these like mysterious dependencies off on that other team that they're just waiting for, and that they're what I think I hear you saying is like, oh, the person who's coming from my group is going to go to this Scrum of Scrums, tell this other group this problem, they're going to try and solve it, then it goes back to the Scrum of Scrums and back to me. Yeah, you don't want that happening. So it's trying to remove as much of that dependence as you can, and then having the team also be empowered to solve some of their own dependencies. So you don't just leave those blocks for the Scrum of Scrums. You definitely are encouraging people to keep talking to each other. And it's strange to think it's solved through Slack channels, but what has been helping a lot with us is having everybody in all those Slack channels. So they can just pop into a group Slack channel and say, hey, can someone help me out? And someone jumps in and then jumps in and helps them out. And that might sound a little simplistic, but it is definitely helping us immensely.
Cool, thank you.
You've been so patient.
Hi, so just full disclosure, I'm from the technical side. I've been the engineer in that silo there. So
you are a silo, is that what you're saying?
Yes, I'm not what you'd call your classic people person. And I wondered about the kind of valid tensions that you're balancing off here. So at one point you'd said that you don't want a process creating silos that shouldn't be there, or silos that you don't intentionally want to be there, which was, I like that, because there was that acknowledgement of that it's not that these things happen because people don't have some reason behind it. So I wondered to what extent you see this as a kind of an almost equilibrium where the people who say it's just about the people and have that mindset are kind of at one end of a continuum down into, say, some more extreme technical specializations where they maybe aren't the people and would tend to put themselves in a silo. So in terms of that kind of continuum and the tension between sort of more extreme specialization that you might need for some projects and the people at the other end, what sort of silos should be there and that you would put there intentionally because you hinted that they might exist?
You know, what I wanted to grab onto is what you're saying about being a people person. You do not have to be an extrovert or a quote unquote people person to be inside a cross-discipline team, right? And to be delivering something. And we absolutely have to adapt to everyone's preferences of the way that they work, right? Everyone's going to be a little bit different. I would say that the kind of centralized tools teams, depending on what technology you're working on, they are usually cross-discipline too, though, right? Inside there, in terms of, you can still have an entirely engineering team, but inside there are different engineering specialties. I don't know if that's the space that you're working inside, but that is kind of where this would apply to, is like, don't just have an entire team of rendering engineers working on rendering features without a tech artist and an artist and other people who those things are being delivered to a part of those conversations. Or you are going to get things delivered that aren't necessarily what people want, or are going to have things in them that are maybe just slightly different than what was asked for, right? And you're getting into that, I write a requirements document and I hand it to someone and they create it and then they expect me to sign off on it at some point. It's hard for me to guess what you're working on because I don't know what you work on, but does that make sense? Like I mean,
it makes sense, and I'd already agree with the kind of things you're saying about, say, having tech artists working with rendering engineers. I mean, specifically, I was really interested in when you said silos that should be there intentionally, whether you've got any specific experiences or things in mind where there was a nod to that kind of balance between the time. So, because the classic thing is, I mean, on the scenario you've got there would be designer comes along and says, oh, we need this, and you almost have that sense of this is something where you want the engineer working really closely with the designer, and everyone in that situation has a really good intuitive grasp of the nice way that should work, until the engineer says, oh, I kind of need to go away and think about this. It's somehow, there's something in there where it sort of it drives them into that inner world of their specialization. It's going to take them away from the communication or the socialization, and then obviously you want them to kind of surface and be going back to the designer and having that relationship. But there's almost a little wedge in there that you feel sort of it'll drive people back into their silo, and then they might forget to surface every so often, kind of thing.
Well, I think that's where process and a little bit of structure comes into it, right? And by no means am I talking about, and I'm sure every engineer in the room is wincing if they thought this is what I'm saying, that you're constantly talking to people all day long, because that would suck. It's more about going into your individual work time and having regular moments where you're syncing back up and having those conversations. And you know when that's happening too, so you're not constantly being interrupted when you're trying to do really focused brain work. Absolutely, it's key. I mean, I do that too. You know, I have to go away sometimes and think about things. Joe knows this about me because he thinks really quickly and I don't. So sometimes I'm like, I don't know, I have to go think about that. It's that same thing, but just to make sure that you are coming together at those certain points.
My mouth wants to keep talking, but I'm not sure I should. I'm gonna have
You can email me. You can message me on Teams too. Go for it. Yeah. Yeah, sounds good. We went way over. Nice job. I didn't put my contact.